So this evening, at least in the UK, although I'm aware that increasingly, which is really cool, we're getting a sort of broader international group of people coming together. So certainly there's some people, or have been some people from the States, for example. And I'm less familiar with what's going on in the States, but in the UK, we're at this sort of point where lockdown measures for COVID-19 are sort of beginning to ease. Stuff's at least beginning to sort of shift a little bit. Cities are kind of coming back to life in a sense. There's stuff that's opening up. We're more able to visit and meet people, at least to some degree, although lockdown is still also in a sense in place. So I just wondered whether it might be worth pausing briefly to pay a little bit of attention. There's many writers and speakers from all sorts of traditions who've been talking about this time as a kind of liminal space, as almost like an initiatory event for humanity, for global humanity on a scale sort of unprecedented, actually. And there can be a very strong draw back to, quotes, business as usual, structures and processes and ways of being that are familiar and reliable, that we had been used to previous to the COVID experience, and yeah, feel kind of manageable, I suppose. And held alongside that, there's something about this liminal space, this sort of threshold, this space where those structures are dismantled to some degree. I mean, the notion that we could ground, all of our aircraft felt utterly impossible before COVID, and yet to a large extent that happened, at least for part of it. So there's something about this space where there is, it's fertile in a sense. There's space for new possibilities. If we are willing to sort of pay attention and not rush too quickly, maybe to the next thing. So there's a great reversal of a quote. Instead of saying what we would expect it to say, it says, "Don't just do something, stand there." More typically, we would be used to the, "Don't just stand there, do something, fix it, act, respond." But maybe there's something about this time where we can be a bit intentional about actually not launching into the doing, but noticing, what might be the gifts or the possibilities latent in this space that we don't understand or know yet. There's a sense in the Ignatian tradition that whatever we mean by God, this isn't a God who stands somehow aloof and separate, sets us off at the beginning of creation and then just watches us go about our merry mess, but actually a God who is, she's intimately involved in the whole confusing process, somehow still at work and laboring for the flourishing of life. And so I hoped that this evening we could spend a little bit of time just looking back over these months, however they've been for us in very different ways, and just notice. So I was imagining what sort of experiences of God, at least I've been struck by, something of a God who is reveling with cheeky goatish delight at the quiet streets of Llandudno. If you're not familiar with this town in North Wales, these goats run riot, and when the town was empty, they were all over the high street, causing havoc. A God who is agitating for change amidst crowds of people marching for Black Lives Matter, for justice, weeping and railing at structures which oppress. A God who might be missing human touch, hugs, intimacy between friends, lovers, family, in isolation. A God who might be figuring out the technical and relational aspects of working on Zoom, who might be experiencing Zoom fatigue, might also be experiencing the breadth of people that can gather together. So this is a God who's sort of intimately involved in the whole process and working for good and for life in various mysterious ways. Yeah, so maybe tuning back into that space of sort of being with yourself, again, eyes closed, if that's helpful. I'll put up a screen in case anybody wants to look at something. It's just the standard C. So closing your eyes and maybe just tuning back into that same breath that we tuned into at the beginning. So we are here as we are. Now I'd invite you just to take a moment to notice, how is God, this mystery, the heart of things, how is she or he present to you here and now? And then maybe find your own words that fit you to express something of this, but asking for help with our remembering, that we might notice these threads of life, these glimmers of life that God has been weaving during this time. And then I'd suggest just trust what comes to your memory. This isn't about remembering every minute detail. It doesn't matter what you remember per se, but just go with what comes and trust that that's what's going to be helpful at the moment. So just to start with, actually, maybe in your memory, you could take yourself back to just before sort of the lockdown impacted you. Do you remember where you were, what you were doing, what life was like? In the UK, it was sometime in mid-March. And what did your life consist of back then? How were you in this, quotes, normal And then remembering back to the actual shift, that beginning of moving into these different times. Way back then, there was lots of panic buying of toilet paper as a thing that I remembered. What was going on in that shift for you in your local area? And then just allow those weeks and months to sort of play through your memory. What happened with work, with home? Who were you living with? What were the changes you experienced? The emotional kind of ups and downs along the way. Just allow it to sort of play out. I'm going to leave a little bit of silence for you to remember whatever comes to mind of this whole time. As you're remembering, maybe allow the things to come to mind that you found difficult, that you've struggled with, that have been challenging. And not judging, just noticing, paying attention, acknowledging. within that, what are the things that you have been missing, that you've lost, the people, the parts of life? And maybe notice that missing these things, these experiences, these people tells you something about what you cherish, what's important to you. And then still just allowing the weeks and months to play in your memory. And this time notice what were the spaces of life, things that gave you energy, things that were possible. And these moments of life might be in your own kind of personal life. They might be broader, they might be things you've noticed nationally, internationally. Spaces that have opened up, which are fertile somehow. And again, in response to this, just see what comes to mind and trust it. What is it that God has noticed about this time with you? What might God want to draw your attention to? Maybe a final question that you might answer, that God might have an answer to as well. If you could keep one thing from the COVID times that would expand and deepen your life and the life of the world, what would it be? If you could keep one thing from the COVID times that would expand and deepen your life and the life of the world, what would it be? And what might you need to ask for to help you to foster that or collaborate with that? And ask for that. And then giving thanks for all that you've remembered and noticed in this time. Bringing yourself back to the here and the now in this space with this group of people in your own time, maybe turning your video on as and when you're back with us.